Yep. Went live.
Hey. That's really pretty cool.
Yes.
So, the name we're supposed to, ground we're supposed to get what's
There's 8. Yep.
I've had 2 officials back out today. I'm so done with basketball. It's just been stupid.
Oh, yeah.
get home one day, that's enough. That's the trouble. How about your driving? Yeah, that
Okay, I've got 7 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And we have, it's being live streamed, so this is being live streamed, and I'm sure we've got some folks there. We pointed the camera so that maybe people can see the screen and me. Not that they want to see me, but sometimes it helps to see the person who's speaking. So I'm kind of standing over here, even though our audience is over on that side. So you have to bear with me a little bit, but thank you for coming. For those that are in person, for braving the elements, the cold weather and all that. And again, the folks who are on our live stream, Phil Unruh is managing that. He's our tech director, so he knows how all that stuff works. And If you have questions as we go through and you're online, please type those into the comments section and we'll go through those as we go. For folks that are here in person, if you have questions, just holler anytime. And we'll keep it very informal, so interrupt me and ask questions as we go through. But really appreciate you being here. This is going to be the first of a series of opportunities to engage. So we're going to continue to do this as many times as we need to. We'll talk about the dates and what those different meetings will consist of, because I think they'll evolve as we go over the course of the next several weeks and throughout the month of February. Tonight's going to be a lot of basics. Some of you have been a part of the process as we've gone along with this bond issue. Others, maybe this is the first time you're going to hear about it, and we want to go through really the basic information, a good overview of what we're talking about at this particular stage and at this point in time. So, what I want to show you first is where we house information. So, as we kind of progress through the next several months and in anticipation of our eventual bond election, which is set for April 26th, we've got information that we'll house on our website that I think can be very helpful. There's some helpful information there now that kind of talks about or speaks to the process that we've used over the last year plus, but there'll be additional information as we kind of move forward. And just want to show everybody, make sure that you know where to go to find the latest information. Some of it's resources, some of it is just updates from groups that have been meeting. And you'll start on our homepage on our website. So when you go to the website, it's just hestonschools.org. There's a red box that says Facilities Planning among all those red boxes. And when you click on that, you'll see several different things. You'll see on the left column a lot of links. So there's different things that you can click on. Some of them are informational, some of them are just notes from meetings that have occurred. I put a new link on there today that we'll look at as part of our presentation tonight. It says building layouts, and that's just kind of an overview of the proposal that we have on the table right now as part of this bond project. SPT, that stands for Spangenberg, Phillips and Tice, which is our architect that we're working with right now. They've been on site many times since last summer and take good notes of every meeting that we have. If you want to see what's going on, or what was going on way back when we started the process as they met with staff or different community groups, you can see those notes from those meetings. We also have our list of facility steering committee members, or at least the original members that we had as part of that group, and we'll talk about what that committee is all about here in just a bit. We made a presentation to what we call our joint council back in December. That's our rec, our school board, and our city council. When they get together, we got together back in December, did a presentation on the project. We have a resource called our capital outlay budget. It's just an overview of the operational budget that we utilize for capital projects in our district on an annual basis. You can see an overview of that. We have a document called our mill levy worksheet. Now I want to click on that one just real quick. I feel like this is a good resource. There's a lot of information, and some of this information you may completely understand, and some of it may be a little bit foreign to you. But just to walk through it very quickly, the first section up there, well, we have our assessed valuation. You can see what that total amount is. You'll also see a list of all the different funds that our school district assesses property taxes on. You'll see our general fund and our local operation or local option budget. Those are our two operational budgets that we use to do most everything for our school district that's not equipment or large capital purchases. That's how we operate the day-to-day. Our capital outlay budget, you can see what we assess there at 8 mils, and our bond and interest, which is what we're paying off in September of this year, while we're talking about another bond project at this time. Below that, you'll see different estimates as to what mill increases would mean in terms of a total dollar figure for a bond project. We currently assess 12.195 mils for bond and interest. If we don't assess any more than that and just carry that over to a new bond project, you can see on a 25-year or 30-year term, the difference would be somewhere between $16 million and $17 million. You can see per mil what those terms would allow us to bring in based on what we would assess. So that's just an overview of all the different additional mills that we would add and what the dollar figure would be on a new project. You'll see estimated property tax impact depending on any level of increase of mills over what we currently assess. So a 1 mil increase on a $200,000 residential property, just as an example, would be $2 a month or $23 a year of an increase. And all the way to, we've got it listed through 12 mills, which would be $23 a month and about $275 a year on a $200,000 property. Below that, you'll see a comparison of the different communities in Harvey County and how we compare in all assessed taxes, property taxes, from the 4 different entities, whether it be the county, the city, the school district, or the rec, and kind of see how we compare and what the different entities. Obviously the county is all the same, city is different, district is different, rec is different, and you can see what those totals are. As you scroll down, you'll also see the historical bond and interest mill levies that we've had. So starting in this year, which is the FY stands for fiscal year 22, that'd be the 21-22 school year, we're assessing 12.195 mils. We rounded it to 12.2, and you can backtrack all the way 20 years ago when we were at 19 mils. You'll notice that in fiscal year 15, which will be the 14-15 school year, to the 15-16, we saw a drop. That was due to a refinance that we did. We've been able to go from 19 mils to 12.195 mils during the course of this current 20-year bond, just to give you some comparison. Below that, on this worksheet, you'll see basically all the school districts in South Central Kansas and what their total mills are and what their bond and interest is. And on the left side, it's kind of, there's 2 columns here. You can see the highest on the left side, starting with Caldwell, Andover, Mound Ridge, El Dorado. We're in the next column, we're about 24th of all those districts. This is from last year. We've actually dropped our mills just a little bit, about 7/10 from where we were last year. So we're around 55 at this time, and the area average is about 56. So a lot of information on that sheet for those that are interested to see kind of how we compare, what we could potentially do, all those types of things. Any questions on that? Okay, again, if you click on facilities from that home page on our website, there's a lot of information there. We'll continue to provide more and more information. We'll house these presentations, so this will be recorded. For anybody who wants to watch these presentations later, those will be available for you too. Presentation tools that we use, those will be there as well. So, okay. So this evening, we want to share again the basics of our bond proposal and kind of where things are as we stand right now. These are set meeting dates, starting with tonight. We're going to have another opportunity similar to this one on Monday at 7 p.m. in this location. I mentioned earlier that I believe that these meetings will evolve over time, meaning that after we get some of this basic information out to people, we'll start targeting things a little bit more specifically around maybe the specific questions that people have or concerns that people have, or just the ideas that folks come up with as we work through the basics of the bond project. So I think if you attend the first meeting, there's probably going to be more to learn as we go through these subsequent meetings as well. And as we get closer to those meeting dates, we'll send out information saying we may spend specific time on the high school building, or on an academic area, or maybe the fine arts area, or the middle school staff may be sharing information with you, committee members, those types of things. So I see these meetings not all being the same as we go through, as people learn more and more about the basics of the bond. But that's what we have set so far. We have one meeting set for, on the 24th, set for 10 a.m. at the Hesston Area Senior Center as well. So we scheduled that here recently, and I think we'll continue to add to our list as we go through. So if different people have ideas on where we can go, if we need to go out and talk to different groups, we're very happy to do that as well. So we want to spend February really providing information on what we're doing with this proposal. Always feel like you can reach out to me. So some folks might not feel as comfortable asking questions in large groups or in a setting like this. So you can always reach out to me if you have questions or you want to sit down, talk more about the project and those types of things. I definitely welcome that. If you know somebody who maybe would rather do that and not come to this type of setting, that's fine too. Let them know they can holler at me anytime. Okay, just very quickly, I'm going to walk through the process that we've used to get where we are right now. I tell people that this conversation about a new bond project, we kicked it off in March, early March of 2020. And then in mid-March of 2020, the world kind of changed and we weren't able to bring people together. And so we got a little bit of a late start. But by about a year ago, it was January of 2021, kind of through that winter, we began forming what we at the time called focus groups. And these were parents and community members, students, folks that we brought together, and they were representing each building in our district. So we had an elementary focus group, middle school focus group, high school focus group, and then a group that also spent time on athletic facilities, grounds, things that were outside the building but still important. At the same time we did that, we had different groups come in and assess all of our infrastructure, assess our roofs, our HVAC, plumbing, electrical, emergency systems. We did a pretty thorough needs assessment throughout the months of January, February, and March of 2021. So our principals led those focus groups and walked through buildings and really tried to highlight all the different things that we felt like were important as we considered a new facilities, we called it at the time a long-term facilities project, knowing that it could eventually become a bond project. Also last spring, and some of you may have attended, we had after doing all that work and assessing our needs, we had a community presentation to go through all that. So we had a meeting here, streamed it, and tried to get people information on the different things that we felt like were significant needs from those different groups. We sent out a community survey at that time. We still have the results of that survey as one of those links on the website as well, so you can see what people highlighted, not only during the focus group work as we presented that information, but also on our survey. And that really told the board, our Board of Education, that we need to consider something long-term for our facilities as we pay off our 20-year bond in 2022. So that was an important step that we took through the winter months and into the spring. The board then decided we wanted to bring in an architect, a partner that could start working with us to design and respond to some of the needs that we felt like the different groups told us we had. So in the summer, we went through a pretty extensive process. We wanted to find a really good partner. So we interviewed a lot of different firms, and we were very selective and ended up selecting SPT Architecture, and Greg Tice is our lead architect. He's been working with us since last summer. Has been an excellent person to work with. He's met with staff. He comes to all of our steering committee meetings, and he's also, one of the things we really appreciated about Greg was he's also a school board member, and a lot of the folks on his team at SPT, they have spouses who are educators. They just really get education on a little bit deeper level. So we really appreciate that about him. In the fall, we also selected a bond council as we started thinking more and more about this becoming a bond project. And that's Stiefel out of Wichita. They've been our bond council on the bond that we're paying off as well, and we have a good relationship with them. And then the board also selected Hutton as our construction manager at risk And we're going to spend time, that's an example of one of the topics we want to spend a little bit more time on as we go through the month of February, so people understand that particular approach versus other approaches that you can take as part of construction. So that was the timeline that we worked through from last spring as we kind of initiated our focus groups, needs assessments, brought some partners on board, and then through the fall, we spent a lot of time with this group, our Facility Steering Committee. So we formed this committee in August and have met regularly from that time until as recently as last week. Actually, we were supposed to meet last night, and that got postponed due to weather, and so we're going to meet next Wednesday. You can see our original members of that committee as one of those links on our website as well. It's changed a little bit. Some people just weren't able to make every meeting and kind of dropped off, but we've added other members as we've gone along, and I think it's been there's probably been at times anywhere between 40 and 50, but we have about 60 people total who participated in that process. One of the first things that we did as we met way back at the start of the school year was look at what the focus groups and what we had learned through that needs assessment process. We started working with our architect at that time, and we wanted to look at a lot of different options. So how do we address the needs that we identified, and what are some designs that we can start looking at and configurations that we can look at to address some of those needs? So Greg, our architect, he started putting together just some concepts for us. One of the very first meetings we met over at the elementary school, and we looked at about 5 different options. We looked at what would it take to do some extensive remodeling. So the groups identified a significant need. How many of you have been in our academic area of our high school? Some have been back there. There's a lot of folks who haven't been back there, and we joke that if we give tours, we would blindfold you, take you to a classroom, and see if you can find your way out, because it can be pretty tricky. The original design, and if you see an overview, you'll see one in a second, of the high school, you'll find that it's made up of all kinds of hexagon pods. You're in one right now, the Fine Arts Pod. And the academic area, from its original design, has changed from way back when the pod system, whether it be circular or hexagon or octagon or all these different kinds of things that were developed way back in the late 60s and early 70s, it's not accomplishing what it originally was intended to do. It was an open concept at that time. We've created a lot of walls, and you're walking through rooms to get to rooms. There's little natural light. Some of you have been students in the area, in that academic area. So just a challenging environment, challenging educational environment. And as our committee kind of evaluated that as one of the primary priorities identified in our needs assessment, the word dysfunctional was brought up, just elements that we felt like needed to be corrected. So that was an example of something that we spent a lot of time working through, and one of the options that we looked at was how do you take that pod system and straighten things out or remodel it in a way that makes it more conducive to learning, add natural light, all those types of things. And what we found was that's extremely difficult to do and feel like you're going to walk away from it liking the result. And we looked at a number of different ways that could be done. All of them, and this was not just SPT, the other architects, as we were interviewing them, they spoke to that. And they all told us the same thing, that if you start to create larger spaces or make 90-degree corners in the rooms, as opposed to having 10 walls, that go different directions, you're going to lose classroom square footage. So you're going to likely have to add on to your building if you do any type of remodel to address kind of the dysfunction that we currently have in those spaces. And as the committee evaluated that, we started looking at the big picture. Is that an efficient way to move forward? And we had that conversation in the context of K-12, not just what's in the best interest here in this building, but how do we configure that in a way that addresses all students K-12? So it was hard work, and when I remember one of the very first nights, we looked at about 5 different options, different ways that we could do remodeling. How could we configure grade level so that it makes the most sense? We continue to look at different options over the next several meetings. But one of the options that was presented on that very first night where we really looked at designs was the idea of creating a 5/8 and 9/12 configuration under the same roof. And the committee, as I was, kind of processing that even after the meeting, just talking to different committee members at that time, that was something that there was a lot of interest in understanding that more. And one thing that I didn't mention last spring that we did, we actually had what we called a grade level configuration team that was made up of teachers from each building. And we spent time just trying to decide, should we put on the table potentially altering the way our grade levels work in Hesston? Because it's right now K4, 5/8, 9/12, and it's been that way for a long time. You have the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school. So we had several meetings with staff, teaching staff, to talk about that. And we talked about a lot of different possibilities, and what we walked away from that conversation with was, we have a district vision, we have a vision in this district, and we want to make that not just something that we hang on a wall, but we want to do things, big things and small things, that reflect that vision that we have. And so we walked away from that grade level configuration meeting saying, we need to put that on the table, because there's advantages to reconfiguring, or at least analyzing what we currently do and how potentially we could do something better. So it kind of gave us permission as we moved into that steering committee to say, we have staff support, let's put these things on the table and see what we can do. So there was momentum after the first couple of meetings for this idea of a combined 5/8, 9/12 system. That's big, right? Part of the reason we want to have these meetings is to talk through that concept, because what you're going to see tonight is a proposal that reflects that. So we continue to work through options, knowing that grade level configurations were on the table. We talked about, does it make sense to have, if we did reconfigure, and we certainly looked at keeping things the same as well, but if we did reconfigure, does it make sense to move 5th grade or even 6th grade over to the elementary school? Because what we were looking at the middle school was an older building, and we identified through our needs assessment that the infrastructure, there's a lot of needs there. Systems are old, obsolete in a lot of cases. We knew there would be a heavy investment that's needed in that building. So we looked at, does a K5 make sense, or even do we stay in the middle school and possibly do a 4/6 there and move 7th through 12th grade? We looked at every option, I think, that could possibly be. And the committee, as we worked through the weeks and months, they kept coming back to this idea of 5/8 and 9/12 being in the same building. So that process is still going. I think we're going to have one more official meeting with this committee as it currently stands to determine if we're ready to make a final recommendation to the Board of Education on that configuration. And we'll take a look at that as we go through this evening. So, the overview of the bond project at the state that we're currently at, you'll see the different dynamics here that we're proposing, or we're prepared to propose to the Board of Education as a steering committee. So you would have a new 2-story, actually 2 wings that would be 2 stories each, that would constitute a new academic area here at the high school. Again, as we looked at, can we remodel a hexagon pod system in a way that's efficient, in a way that we're going to walk away feeling good about for not just 10 years or 20 years, but 50 years down the road? It didn't seem like it would be a good approach as we looked at different options there. So we're proposing that we would do 2-story wings, one likely that would go to the west and one that would go to the north. At least that's how it's configured right now. And that would allow us then to transition grades 5 through 8 to this building. And we talked about how we want to keep the elements of 5th through 8th grade in place. So when you hear me refer to it, we're talking about a 5/8 and a 9/12. We're not referring to it as a 512. The system allows us to operate the things that and keep the structures that we currently have that we love about grades 5-8 in place, but capitalize on less transition for students and more opportunities, especially for our younger kids, to have programming that currently isn't available as we operate two different buildings. And that's another topic in and of itself, where we need to talk more about the advantages that we can give kids, where we can maintain. If you've had middle school kids, you know about some of the things we do in the middle school that are pretty special. Things that we do to start each day, like our RS program and our buddy system, where we have relationships built between 8th graders and 5th graders, and we don't want to lose any of that. We feel like we can maintain those things by keeping that 5-8 and 9-12 structure. We would also have a new auditorium addition, and I'll show you where that would be located. You're in our auditorium right now if you're in person, and we feel like there's limitations. If we go behind this really well-decorated stage area, you would find a music room of sorts, right, Mr. Rhodes? I think that was the original intent. You'll find a band room that's got some size to it, but some limitations, and if you've ever watched a performance here, you know there's some limitations with this space that we have. Mrs. Hageman's art room is right next door, not very conducive for a quality art program. We feel like we need to do better with those spaces. So we would have a new, as part of this proposal, a new auditorium that would be built, and this space would be remodeled. The renovation that would take place here would likely allow us to move the location of our current weight room, which is over at the stadium where students have to walk each day for those classes. We would remodel this space in part to be a weight room that would be housed in the building itself, which we feel like would be very advantageous for a lot of reasons. Additionally, we would build a new auxiliary gym in the area that used to be the swimming pool, that would be adjacent to the main gym that we have right now. That was kind of a late addition. We'll talk about why that was a late addition to the project. We would renovate the main entry and house not only our high school office area, but we would want to also have a space for a middle school office as well, as we try to create both that 5-8 and 9-12 system. Additionally, we would renovate the current shop and pit stop. You maybe have been in the pit stop before. It has limited access. This would be a little bit of a smaller project, but we'd like to expand that space, give kids more space to operate, especially on game nights or even school days where that gets pretty busy and crowded. And we'd also like to expand our shop area and consider providing more opportunities for kids for hands-on type programming that we're pretty limited on space at this point in time. So those are the big ideas as far as the current bond project and the proposal that the committee will likely make to the Board of Education. So very quickly, just to kind of walk through the timeline as we are here in early February, knowing that we have this committee that's been meeting and putting all these things together for an eventual recommendation to our board. There's a bond election that's scheduled for April 26th. Our goal is to get the bond language or the ballot language to the county by early March. That's kind of our deadline. So we're working to finalize all these things over the next several weeks so that in early March we can get the final language to the county. In mid-February, our plan and our timeline right now would allow our facility steering committee to make a recommendation to the Board of Education on what that ballot language would be. The board has that's their decision, so they can receive that recommendation and move forward with it, or make alterations, or even pull it off completely. That's the board's call, and until we get that information to the county, they have the ability to do any of those things, so there's a lot of flexibility at this point. In March and April, so February is a lot of information, as I mentioned. We're going to try to meet with as many people as who want to engage in any location, in my office if you want to come by there, or we'll come out to you. You can certainly come to these presentations, but we just want to provide good information and answer all the questions that you have. All the things that you've just heard are big things. This isn't a small project, and there's probably a lot of questions that people will have, not only right now, but as they think more and more about what they're hearing. And we want to be able to respond to all those questions and provide good information through the month of February and beyond that as well. But really, as we get into March and April, it would be more, you're going to hear more campaign language. Folks who get excited about this type of project, who would be going out and telling people why it would be beneficial for our kids, for our staff, for our community, for everybody at Hesston. So that's kind of the timeline as we move forward. The approximate cost right now, as the bond is situated the way I described, is about $33.5 million. And that's where that mill levy worksheet, and I can get all scenarios to you if you have questions on how that could impact us here in Hesston. But you can do some of the comparisons as you look at that worksheet. So I encourage you to use that as a resource, and we'll continue to provide information as far as what that total dollar figure will ultimately be. But as we stand here this evening and you look at all those different possibilities, that's approximately what it would cost to do all those things. So this is a layout, and this is available on our website as well. It's the very first link at the top of the page on that facilities update. This is a layout of the proposal here in this building. I'll try to use my laser pointer here just to orient you for those that are here in the building. This is the entryway into the high school as it exists right now. This is the fine arts pod here. This is the commons area, and this is the academic wing. This over here is not a separate building that we're proposing. This is a second story that would go over the top of this. This green section over here is the old pool area where a new auxiliary gym would be built. The primary purpose for that gym would very likely be to serve our middle school students for both practices, possibly games, that type of thing. Our current auxiliary gym is here, and this is below it to the south would be where a new auditorium and band and choir room would go. So it would be on the auditorium would be added to the south side of the building. We would renovate, again, this fine arts pod. We're right here in the auditorium right now, and that would become probably something athletics related. Again, a weight room inside the building would be probably the #1 priority there. We would renovate the shop, and this is where the pit stop would be. We want to expand that, create more accessibility into the pit stop than what we currently have, which is just a singular door. I'd like to make that more accessible from the commons area, both during the school day and for events as well. One thing that we would also add, you'll notice there's a corridor that would run through the fine arts pod in some format or another. We'd like to make the aux gym and the new auditorium more accessible. Right now you have to walk all the way around in front of the main gym, down the back hallway, all those things. We would like to be able to create a direct connection there to access both the auxiliary gym and the auditorium as well. So the extensive work would be, and you can see right here, that's the overlay where the current pods are. So you kind of get a little bit of a scale of what that looks like as far as how the size and everything would work. We would likely have one hallway devoted to middle school and one hallway devoted to high school in the academic area. What questions do you have, or thoughts do you have as you hear about these ideas and look at that, kind of the layout there? Phil, if there's anything online, let me know.
Okay.
So
So
talk
far.
about the halls. Who's upstairs, who's downstairs, how do you separate middle
Yeah.
school and high school?
So a really common question or concern that we've heard even from our committee. So a lot of folks on the committee when they hear 5 through 12 in the same building, that can create some concern for the age differences. You know, so you have 5th graders who are 10 years old, and you have seniors who are 18 years old, and that can be concerning for a lot of people. So the question about how will that look during the school day? What will the separation be like? The way we currently believe that the building layout will look, we'll have, again, a middle school wing and a high school wing. And separating those two wings will be a library space, media center. We've got some ideas on what that can look like, but there'll be a separation point between those two hallways where you won't have any crossover with kids in a restroom area or even during the normal passing periods and all of that. I say that, there's going to be times, and I'll use the middle school configuration that we have right now as an example. So one of the things that Hesston Middle School does better than anybody else, and I think I can say that safely, because people come and ask us how we do it all the time, is how we mix kids in grades 5, 6, 7, and 8. We do it every day. Every single day for 30 minutes, or 25 maybe, you'll find 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders mixed in one classroom. And it's the best thing that we do. And I think, you know, in this type of system, there's going to be times where we'll want to do similar things. But the day-to-day experience, you're going to see very, very limited interaction between 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders and 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. There'll be times and probably structures we put in place to capitalize on when we want that to happen, but the day-to-day, that'll be very limited. A lot of that can be done by scheduling. So again, the middle school being a good example. After that RS period, that first 25, 30 minutes of the day, there's very limited interaction, if any, that occurs between 5th and 6th graders and 7th and 8th graders. And that's just how we configure our schedules. So a lot of it's done through scheduling. A lot of it's done through intentionality and supervision and just understanding when we want to and when we don't want kids to mix. So I feel like the people that our school board hires, staff members, it's important that you hire good ones so that you make sure that when you say you're going to be able to do those things, you can do them. And you put good schedules and good structures in place to know when you want and don't want kids to mix by age. But the layout of the building would allow us to keep kids naturally separated, and then scheduling kids would allow that as well.
Are they going to eat together?
Unlikely. So that's a really good point. So you'll notice that the commons area, and if you've been out in the commons area, we have a partial wall that surrounds most of it. If you go right outside the auditorium here, you'll notice that. So knowing that this fine arts pod is really large, there's a lot of space here, you know, what we're in right now. Part of the remodel, I didn't mention this, would be to take a portion of the auditorium currently and expand our commons area. So we want to bring our commons area this way, where we have a separate eating location for middle school kids and high school kids. So we feel like we'll have a large common space that will be able to house both. We don't want to run lunches at times that don't make sense. So there's the potential that you could have both happening at the same time. They would just be in 2 separate spaces, so, for lunch.
The kitchen twice as large then, or?
We're having a kitchen study done. So what our architect thinks we'll do, instead of having to expand the kitchen, it's kind of rework how it works with equipment and those types of things. So we'll have a better understanding of that when that kitchen study is completed, but that's a big part of what we're determining at this point. Yeah. Other questions?
Do you have just like I assume, like a old square footage, new square footage comparison of the current schools and the
We do.
new common school? I assume that's the number you throw out.
Yeah, we can get that information to you. Our architect has that. I can tell you that as we've done classroom analysis, so making sure that we have, more than enough classroom, not only space, but also the numbers of classrooms that we currently use to house all the different programs that we have. We'd be expanding slightly the number of classrooms and our classroom space. If you've been in the middle school, we have large classrooms, but if you come to the high school, it's pretty limited. Some classrooms are a little bit larger than others. I tell people that not too long ago I taught in a classroom, and I was teaching juniors, which is our really large class, and barely knew where to stand in the room because it was so congested. So you have expansion of most of our classrooms at the high school. The square footage will be expanded. Middle school will be very similar, and we really like the size of our middle school classrooms right now. Other questions?
You looked at traffic flow for the people picking up their kids.
Yeah, so traffic flow. As a matter of fact, when I talked to Greg Tice, our architect today, he's working on that design right now. We want to have a separate entry for middle school versus high school, especially as kids are entering the building. We feel like the likelihood is that we will have an entry on the west side of the building, and you'll notice that as you look at the west side, that there's an expansion. So the hallway that runs here expands on these last 4 classrooms. And that's, the intent there is to create a little bit of a common space, a wider space where students can gather. We have it wouldn't be quite the same size, but we have large common spaces at our elementary school that we really like outside of our classrooms. We want to try to recreate that as much as we can for our middle school wing, where students will be able to enter as they start the school day, and we're looking at whether we would need to expand our parking lot, but right now we would use the 2 western sections of our parking lot as a drop-off for middle school, and probably, I haven't broken this news to the high school students, but a lot of the student parking is there now. We may have to have them park in the stadium parking lot and walk a little bit further just so we can keep that area cleared. But we would very likely maintain the same entry point for high school for 9th through 12th graders and have a separate location where we would drop off and have middle school students enter. And our architect is working on that design. He was working on that today. So that's an example of something that we'll be able to provide an update on as we kind of work through these meetings as well.
Is there anything in this that's going to upgrade the football bathrooms?
The football bathrooms.
Those are terrible.
Yeah. We don't have it here. So the question is, or I guess the statement is, the football bathrooms are terrible. I think all of us would agree. There's nothing in this project, and that's a question that people have, is there's not a huge emphasis on the stadium, on tennis courts. I mean, these are things that we've certainly identified as needs. We just feel like we're going to have to find different ways to fund those needs. And when we talked about the priorities that we have, so going even back to our survey from the spring and our focus groups from the spring, it was interesting to see that the priorities were academic areas, infrastructure, fine arts. Those were the 3 highest rated areas. And sports wasn't, I mean, it's still something that people want, but it wasn't as critical, I think, whenever we really identified our priorities. So, long answer, but right now we don't have anything stadium related or really outside of the building as a primary focus of the bond project. When you utilize the resources that we have available, check the capital outlay overview. So you'll notice on that, we've spent a lot of time talking about this, but I think it's important for everybody to understand. If you go back about 8 years ago, we weren't carrying a very good balance in capital outlay. So if we had some needs come up, then we would hope that we could take care of those needs. And at times we had to finance some of those needs, meaning we were going to pay them off over time. That's not a real comfortable position for a school district to be in, so our board decided that we need to correct that, and we're now carrying about 5 times or 4.5 times the balance that we had at that time. So as part of what we're working through with the bond project, we're also putting together a 10-year capital outlay plan where we create priorities. We have some already, but continue to establish priorities that we can identify and pay for over time out of our annual capital outlay budget. Good example could be improvements at the stadium. There's a lot of things we want to do at the elementary school that we would work out of a 10-year capital plan that would be separate from the bond, knowing that the needs that we've identified here, the advantages that we feel we would have by moving 5 through 8 over here, the improvements that we would be able to make with infrastructure and all those types of things, knowing there's still things that we would like to do. So things that aren't on the list, that are still priorities, will become part of that 10-year plan through our capital outlay budget that our board has done a great job of putting us in a position where we can do that out of our annual capital outlay. So, because I agree, football restrooms are not good. You know, and another example, something that's not good, our visiting locker rooms. You know, those are in really bad shape. And some people will say, well, it's just the visitors, so do you want to give them something nice? But the old pool area, you know, that's now obsolete, we want to improve that space. I mean, there's areas in the building here, even our restrooms that we have right out here in the commons area are they're not great either. So those are things that we will improve as part of the bond. It's just not being able to do everything we want, but having a plan for those things that we can't do right away. Other questions?
Ben, can you touch on what decision went into moving grades from middle school to high school? Why the middle school is not in this scenario?
Yeah, so one of the big things that I feel like as we kind of move through these meetings, and we want to spend a good amount of time on, and I want to give better people than me an opportunity to speak to that, so that the question is, what was the reason, or why are we proposing moving students out of a middle school building? And there's a number of reasons for it. I mentioned it a little bit early on that as the committee looked at that possibility and looked at the analysis that was done of especially the systems at the middle school. So if you take the HVAC system, just the pipes and things that run through that building, Les, you could speak to this better than I can, but we found that the investment that we would need to make in those systems is substantial, very, very large. That doesn't necessarily have to be done immediately. I mean, our students are very safe in that building. They're going to be fine for a period of time, but as we analyze the needs that were there and the cost over time, and looking at it from a student programming, academic development perspective, we felt like that the things that we could accomplish if we brought the students over here would be far more valuable than what the investment that it would take to get those systems up to speed would be. So weighing all those things, looking at what can we do for kids first, and what will it take to get that building to where we want it to be, and what is it going to look like in another 20 years or 25 years or 30 years. That's where the committee put all those things on the table and said, we feel like the advantages are here. We feel like having kids over here from an academic programming standpoint, you know, personally, as I look at our district vision, I think the advantages are significant. We need to be able to speak to those advantages. So as we weighed all those things, it became about efficiencies, but I think when it comes down to it, we're going to be able to provide more for our kids with them being here. And so that's how we arrived at that decision ultimately. Other questions? Yes.
Obviously, it's a very large project. If the bond issue doesn't pass, has there been a contingency plan for figuring out how we can address the needs that are obvious?
Sure. Yeah, so the bond project is a large project. The dollar figure is large. We have an election on April 26th, and people will get to decide, and we want to do a good job up to that point, providing good information, good answers to questions, recognizing that there's going to be concerns. And if if, when we vote on April 26th, it doesn't pass, what's the plan at that point? Well, there's things that would have to be talked about. The first thing that we would have to recognize is that 12 mills will come off, right? So we're assessing 12.195 mills on bond and interest. That's going away. And we would be replacing that, if we pass the bond, with whatever the equivalent would be for approximately a $33.5 million project. So if we didn't pass it, those 12 mills would come off, and we would have to address immediate needs that we have. We wouldn't be able to do anything substantial. We've got, if you look at our capital outlay budget, we have about $2 million in capital outlay. That's going to be, for a district our size, with the types of buildings we have, that's enough money to take care of needs. You know, again, 8 or 9 years ago, when we were carrying about $400,000 a year over, that goes really fast. You know, if you have a boiler go out, that's where we had to finance things at that point. We have the money in capital outlay to meet our needs right now, but we won't be able to transform anything. You know, so the bond opportunity is an opportunity to really look at how we want to do education in Hesston, how we want to not only maintain the quality that we've had for a really long time, since the outset of this school district and community, but how do we want to look at the next 50 years? I mean, that's the part of this bond that's a little bit unique. It's not looking at a 20-year increment of time, where, you know, we could do something much smaller, and it would create a lot less anxiety for me, I will tell you. You know, a $15 million project that doesn't raise taxes, I think we would be pretty successful with that. We're not looking at that, though. We're looking at something that we feel like at this point in time will address some real fundamental challenges that we have, and will provide something pretty special for not only this group of kids that we have coming through right now, but generations to come. So the immediate answer to the question about if the bond wouldn't pass is, we're going to be able to address our immediate needs. Those needs will be things that aren't super exciting for people. It's just when something breaks down, we'll be able to fix it. When we need to replace it, we can do that and continue doing the things that we've been doing for the last, you know, number of years. So that's, yeah, we're in good shape as far as that goes.
It is a good time because of the low interest rates and such.
Yeah, so we're working with Steve Shobrin. He's another good partner for us. He's our bond counsel, and he's been advising our committee and our board on interest rates and you know, the best terms that we can look at as far as, you know, currently, you know, as things are, the variables are what they are right now. But we do feel good about that part of it, sure. Mr. Stockwell.
Someone online asked about the timeline for this project. What's the ultimate timeline if this was to pass?
As far as getting it done?
Yes.
Great question. So it's important when you do something like this, to recognize that you have to stage it in a way, ideally, that allows you to stay operational. And operational in a way that doesn't completely disrupt everybody's lives in a significant way or a negative way. So one of the advantages of this configuration that we have here is we would be able to do that. As we would kind of stage things over time, we would be able to construct one wing of the building and allow our high school students to move into that wing. Of course, our middle school students would remain in the middle school during that time, so we wouldn't have to move them over until we are able to construct that second wing. So the overall timeline to get everything done, we would actually have middle school kids remain at the middle school for next school year, which is the 22-23 school year, and the following, the 23-24 school year. So the first year that the new building would be completely operational would be 24-25. And when I fairly recently met with some of our high school students to share this concept with them, it dawned on most of them that some of them won't see it. So the seniors, they're out of luck. The juniors may have their life disrupted a little bit. The sophomores too, and they don't get much benefit. But the freshmen, it dawned on the freshmen that they would actually get to benefit in their senior year from the new design, the new building. But it would be several years before all of that would be completed, and the 24-25 school year, everything at that point should be done. So, but again, as we've worked with our architect, and he's got, that's another area that we can provide on our website where you can actually see the staging, how we would construct one element and the other, how we would, there would likely be some temporary walls built where safety is concerned, but we'd be able to still keep all kids in the building while that's happening. So an advantage of this particular configuration. Yes?
Plans for the middle school building.
Great question. So the question about what would happen to the middle school building, and we've spent, I think, just about every meeting with that facilities committee kind of talking through that. So in our bond language right now, the language is pretty intentionally stated that if deemed necessary, the building could be raised or torn down. Now, we're going to need it for 2 more years, so that's not something that would happen right away, but that if deemed necessary gives the board the flexibility over that 2-year period that if something became viable for that building, whether it be district related or not, we know that the investment that's needed in the building is substantial. And one of the advantages that we have from an efficiency standpoint is taking that off of the school district so that we don't have to spend the millions of dollars it's going to take to improve the facility. But there could be something that develops over the period, over that course of time, that could become viable for either all or a portion of the middle school. But we would have the availability based on the ballot language to be able to raise the building if ultimately there wasn't a viable option moving forward. So there's a lot of flexibility, I would say, at this point with what could ultimately happen to the middle school building. But tearing it down would be an option.
The intent would be to keep the land.
Yes, yes, we would like to do that for sure. Keeping the land would be important, yes.
You talked a lot about first floor. What's going on with the second floor?
So the first floor and second floor would be primarily classrooms. So the hallways would have classrooms on either side. There'd be restrooms on both floors. One of the unique elements of what we have, and we're working on some design, so this is kind of a rough sketch, but this middle space here, it's a 2-story media center that, again, separates the 2 hallways and separates the 2 grade levels. But all of these, as you go along this hallway, off of them are classrooms on either side, on both floors. So it would just be primarily an academic area. And some of the, like I mentioned, our art room that's currently located here. So this is a good example of something that, you know, it's not ideal. Kids walk through the auditorium every day to get to the art room, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but when they're doing ceramics, I notice, which has been happening fairly recently, there's a lot of tracking of things back and forth all the way through. And just having that classroom, it's not shaped well, there's not a lot of space there. That's something that we would move into the academic area. Our robotics room. So we have a very strong robotics program here at the high school. That's currently a room that's been converted and reconverted for a lot of different purposes. We would have an actual robotics room separate from that space that it's currently in this academic area. It would have more size and space for kids to do the things that they do in that program. So there would be advantages to having classrooms that are built, not just for the program, but for flexibility. And I think that's something currently that's pretty limited just based on how the building is configured. So, but yes, it would all be classrooms in those spaces. Yes?
I may have too many questions. Storm shelters.
Yes, so I should have mentioned that. We're adding storm shelters off of the new auditorium, which they will be dual purpose band and choir rooms as well. So behind the auditorium, You'll have a band room and a choir room, and these would be built as storm shelters. So one of the questions that's come up and concerns that's come up is the distance that we have between one side of the building and the other. And so we're analyzing that. Actually, Mr. Rhodes and I have talked. We're going to do some trial runs even this spring to determine how long potentially it could take to get kids. We are adding a corridor here that would be very helpful, so you have multiple ways to access that. But that is currently the plan, is to add the storm shelters off of the auditorium itself. Our current space that we use would be the locker room area of the gymnasium, which Mr. Rhodes, I've never been over here during a tornado drill, but it seems less than ideal, probably just from a space standpoint. Yep. This would be better as far as that goes, for sure. Other questions? Yes.
The equipment comes out of the weight room, existing weight room. Would there be plans for that space, or is it just more weight room?
As far as the space for the weight room, the existing weight room, we haven't settled on anything as far as what that would be. I think there's a lot of potential for that space, especially on game nights and opportunities maybe for some extra locker room space, that type of thing. But we haven't settled on anything just yet. We always need storage, so I don't necessarily see that location being a storage area, but anywhere we can expand storage, I think would be advantageous for us too. Other questions? This is, we do have a pretty, I think, well ironed out concept for the auditorium that we would like to build. I say that because SPT designed the auditorium in Marion, at Marion High School, and it's very, very nice. They did that, I think it's about 14 years old, and we feel like that design, and as we kind of work through our committee, and you'll hear, as again, we kind of have more meetings, you'll hear from some of our fine arts people who believe that this would be a very, very nice addition. And they'll be a key player as they ultimately design what that auditorium would be. But we feel like a design like this or a concept like this would really be, it'd be more reflective of the type of fine arts programs that we have here. The spaces that our kids can perform in based on the standards that's been set for those programs. We've talked about this a little bit this evening. We feel like, and I don't believe I'm the best person, but I think you need to hear from staff members, middle school staff members, high school staff members that can speak to this idea of 5th through 8th graders being with 9th through 12th graders. Having had my own children in those grade levels, going through, and knowing a lot of our high school kids, I think there's a perception that, we should be concerned about high school kids and younger kids, and we've got some teachers who work with all those age groups, and they're anxious to talk to community members who have concerns about that. Not only about, why it's probably not a concern, but also the types of things that we would do during the school day. Mr. Rhodes and Mr. Heinrichs, our principals, would be important people to talk to about that. What are the structures that are in place, again, that will promote, the kids mixing at times that we want them to, or learning from one another at times where we don't want that to occur, and we'll keep them in separate spaces. So we know this is a really big topic, and as we kind of work through these meetings and they evolve over time, and as we communicate, there's going to be opportunities for people that have that specific concern that can come in and hear from the people that can address that and answer questions, and what is that actually going to look like, and all those types of things, because we know that is something on a lot of people's minds. I've talked to a lot of our staff have talked to numbers of school districts that have various configurations. Mound Ridge is an example. They have a 412 configuration. So I know our elementary counselor, Mrs. Lafferty, she's told me that she's talked to their principal and how they wouldn't want it any other way. You know, and there's things they do to promote some of that, you know, that crossover of grades and age groups, just like we do at our middle school. Southeast Saline is a K-12. And I think they love it. You know, just the ways that you can integrate older kids and younger kids together, and that's where you want to have good people doing those things. There's a lot of 7-12 structures in schools our size. And as I reached out to different superintendents that operate those grade level configurations, almost every single one of them said the same thing. When we moved to that configuration, people were concerned, and it's only been a positive. You know, just by the way, the things that you put in place, the structures you put in place to make that a positive. We've got really good kids. There's some things that we'll want our older kids and our younger kids to do together. There's times where that's not going to be what we want to do, but I think it opens up a lot of opportunities. So, but we want to spend time on that topic and let the people who will work directly with the kids talk to you about it. What else? Other questions that you have? Again, tonight it's a lot of basics. Monday, going to be kind of the same thing. This is the overview. This is what we've been working on. Here's kind of the big idea, the details of the project. But we want to start gathering the questions and concerns that you have so that we can better respond to those things, get the right people in touch with you. We know that there's going to be a lot of those things that come up. So we want to spend this month especially just digging into what those concerns are. Again, it's not an easy one. This is a big project, but I think the process that's been put in place to get us to this point has been very good, with a lot of input, and there's a lot of good reasons why the things that are being proposed are being proposed. But we also know that it'll bring up a lot of questions and concerns, and we need to be able to respond to those things. So, what else do you have this evening?
Is the enrollment assumed static for this plan? I mean, is there any room for change?
Yes. So the question is about enrollment over time, and what does this proposal do if maybe we were to grow or even not grow? Yeah, even lose students. So right now, all indications are we're going to stay pretty flat. Our enrollment's been very steady over the last 20 years plus. We don't have any indications that we will see sizable growth or loss of enrollment. So this plan really addresses additional space for what we currently have, as far as, you know, averaging between, we've been anywhere from about 790 students to almost 860 students over a 20-year period. That's what we're building. This building, I believe, is big enough to have 450 to 500 students. We're not losing any of that, so you're building for more space. If, for whatever reason, we were to see a significant growth in population or enrollment in USD 460, this particular plan, as part of the architect's design, would allow us to expand easily. So we could add additional spaces based on how the design has been created, which is something that we talked with our architect about early on. We're not doing that as part of this particular project, but we know that we can over time. So right now, you know, as we sit here right now, we're on the higher end of enrollment. We have about 850 students. The largest we've been in about 20 years is 856, and that was 2 years ago. So we're on a little bit of the upper end. We're a little bit unique in that our kindergarten class is really small, but we believe our next kindergarten class is going to be quite large. So we have a lot of that, where we'll have 1 year where we may have 85 students, another year like our juniors and sophomores. We're at low 80s for juniors, low 50s for sophomores. We see some of that. We have probably the most kids we've ever had at the middle school. What are we at, Greg? About 800? No, it's about 280, 286, I think. There's a bunch. So yeah, it's just interesting how we'll see variability between grade levels, but I've seen a lot of consistency overall. So, but we are planning for that as well. Either way. Other thoughts or questions? I want to encourage you guys here and anybody online, if you do have things or things that come up, I really, myself, want to be very available for sit-down conversations. I've been able to meet with people individually over the last several weeks as information is starting to get out. I want to encourage you to reach out, or if you know people who have concerns. I don't know that I'll be able to put everybody at ease, because there's going to be concerns that just are going to be concerns with this type of project, and that's okay too. But at least we want to have an opportunity to talk about, you know, how we've arrived here and why we believe that this is a good proposal for the board to consider. So we'll continue to have these opportunities. We can have as many as we need. Again, we'll go out to different groups if you feel like that would be good. But we'll meet all through February and then you know, continue that into March and April too. But just want to make sure that everyone knows that I'm very available. This is important. I think it's an important time in our community. You know, I've been in Hesston now for 10 years, actually 11, because I lived here 20 years ago in the Elrose Apartments when I was a coach here, and was able to come back. But it's an amazing place, you know, and we want to do things right, do things well, and I think this is reflective of that. I think the process has been really good, but everybody's going to have to decide how they feel about things. We just want to make sure that we're giving really good information, transparent information. We don't want to feel like we're keeping anything from anybody. So again, holler at me anytime. There's also really good people that I can point you to. And as we go through these sessions, we're going to have a lot of those people up and sharing their own perspectives as well. So I encourage you to keep coming. Monday night will probably be pretty similar. We knew we might have a smaller group tonight just with weather. But as we get into the middle part of the month and later part of the month, you're going to hear from staff, community members, folks that can speak to some of these things better than I can. And I think those are important voices to hear. So, but please don't hesitate to reach out to me and encourage others to do the same. Other thoughts or questions this evening? Okay. Well, I hope it's been helpful, or at least a good start. Spread the word. If there's a better way we can get information out to people, let us know. We'll do everything we can to do so. So really appreciate you being here this evening. Thank you.